The first thing I noticed about working for Cassian Wolf was that he counted everything. Not in an obvious way, not with clipboards or checklists or the kind of performative precision that middle managers use to justify their salaries. It was subtler than that. The way he'd glance at the clock when I arrived each morning, not checking it exactly, just acknowledging it. The way you acknowledge a fact you already knew. The way he'd note, without comment, that I'd reorganized the filing system on my third day before he'd asked me to. The way he remembered, 6 weeks in, that I took my lunch at 12:15, not 12. Because the good sandwich place around the corner from our building had a rush until quarter after. I'd been at Wolf Capital for 2 months and 11 days when the flowers arrived. I know the exact count because I'd started keeping track somewhere around day 30, when I realized this job was different from the 3 that came before it. Not easier. Cassian Wolf was the most demanding employer I'd ever had, and I'd once worked for a woman who sent revision requests at 2 a.m. and expected responses by 3. But different in the way that things you can't quite explain feel different. The way a room changes when someone walks into it, even before you turn around to see who's there. I was at my desk outside his office on the 31st floor, reconciling a discrepancy in the third quarter portfolio analysis, when Meg from the front desk called up. Miss Navarro. She still stumbled over my name sometimes. There's a delivery down here for you. Flowers. I pulled the phone slightly away from my ear and stared at it for a second. For me? Big arrangement. Like really big. Want me to send them up? I thought about my desk, which was precisely organized and had exactly enough surface area for my monitors, my notebook, and the ceramic mug I'd brought from home. Just hold them at the front, Meg. I'll grab them at lunch. I went back to the discrepancy. It took me another 40 minutes to find it. A transposed digit in a currency conversion from a fund acquisition 3 years before I'd started, buried in a footnote that everyone had apparently been ignoring. I flagged it, documented it, sent a summary to legal, and was 3 lines into drafting the correction memo when Cassian's voice came through the intercom. The Hendricks Bridge loan analysis. Where are we on the timeline risk assessment? Already in your inbox. I flagged the variable rate exposure in section 4. There's a window in Q2 where the model assumes stable SOFR, but the Fed's signaling otherwise. I highlighted 3 scenarios. A pause. Then, you pulled the Fed minutes? From last Tuesday's release, yes. The language shifted. It seemed relevant. Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had that particular quality it got sometimes. Not warm exactly, but like the temperature in the room had risen 1 degree. Come in. I gathered my notes, straightened my blazer. Charcoal, fitted, the kind of thing I'd started wearing after I realized that looking like I took the job seriously made people take me seriously, and pushed open his office door. Cassian Wolf was standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the financial district, hands clasped behind his back. The Chicago skyline laid out behind him like something from a magazine spread that couldn't quite decide if it was about power or loneliness. He was in his early 40s, with the kind of dark hair that had started going silver at the temples, in a way that looked less like aging and more like a deliberate choice. His suits were always perfect. His expression was usually not. "Walk me through your Fed reasoning," he said, without turning around. This was a test. I'd learned that in week 2. He did this with things he'd already decided were correct, challenged them to see if the person presenting would defend their work or fold. The minutes from the September meeting show a 2-member dissent on the hold decision, I said. That's new. Combined with the inflation revision they published last Thursday and the labor market numbers from Friday, the probability of a hold through Q2 is lower than the model assumes. If rates move even 25 basis points in March, the variable exposure in Hendricks becomes material. He turned then. His gray eyes, not warm, not cold, just extraordinarily attentive, found mine across the room. "You're watching the dissent votes. Decence votes are the canary," I said. "By the time the headline decision changes, it's already priced in." Something shifted in his expression. A fractional thing, the kind you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. I'd been paying attention. "Good," he said. "Revise the model to include 2 rate scenarios and rerun the timeline. Have it back to me by end of day." I turned to leave. "The flowers," he said before I reached the door. My hand tightened on my notebook. Meg mentioned it when she called up to confirm the Meridian lunch. His voice had gone carefully, precisely neutral. You're not expecting a delivery? No, interesting. He looked back out the window. Who knows you work here? I haven't told anyone outside my family. He didn't respond to that, just nodded once, a small efficient movement, like he was filing information. I went back to my desk. I rewrote the rate model. I did not think about the flowers. I lasted until 12:20 before going downstairs. They were on the security desk, 24 white peonies in a low black vase, the kind of arrangement that cost real money and wasn't bought from a grocery store. There was a card, small envelope, my name in handwriting I didn't recognize. For the woman who notices everything, I've been noticing you. T.I. stood there for a moment with the card in my hand. Then I put it in my pocket, told the security guard I'd come back for the vase at the end of the day, and went to get lunch. When I came back upstairs, Cassian was in the hallway near my desk, not waiting for me, ostensibly reviewing something on his phone, but he was rarely in the hallway. He had an office and a conference room, and a private elevator, for when he needed to avoid the main floor. The hallway was not his natural habitat. Lunch good? He asked, not looking up. Fine. I sat down. The Hendrix revision is done. Sent it to you while I was out, I saw. He pocketed his phone. The flowers. Did you find out who sent them? I should have said no. It was the truth. I didn't know a T. But something in his tone made me look up, and what I saw in his expression wasn't quite what I'd expected. He looked controlled. Very carefully, precisely controlled, which with Cassian Wolf usually meant the opposite of calm. There was a card, I said. Just an initial. T. His jaw tightened by a fraction. Have you received anything else? Messages, calls? No. I paused. Should I have? He held my gaze for a beat longer than was professional, then, let me know if you do. He walked back into his office and closed the door. I looked at the card again. Then I put it in my desk drawer and went back to work. The next 3 weeks were strange. Not obviously strange. Cassian was exactly as demanding as he'd always been. My days still ran on the tight, precise rhythm I'd built around his schedule, and the work itself was the kind of complicated I'd spent my whole career looking for. But there were these small things. He started finding reasons to be near my desk when I was on calls. Not listening, or at least not appearing to listen, but present. He revised a security protocol for the building, which I only found out about when the head of facilities asked me to confirm my new keycard access levels. When I mentioned I was taking the train home late after the Henderson deal closed, he informed me, without apparent emotion, that a car had been arranged. That's not necessary, I said. It's late. The car is there. He paused. Don't argue with me about this, Cass. It was the first time he'd called me that. The short version of my name, the way my sister did, the way college friends did. I'd been Ms. Navarro to him for 2 months and 11 days, and then suddenly I was Cass, and he said it like he'd been saying it for years. I didn't say anything. I took the car. 4 weeks after the peonies, a second delivery arrived. This one came to my building at home. I was on my couch with takeout and a financial modeling textbook when the buzzer went. The delivery driver handed me a flat box, the kind that jewelers use, and a card in the same handwriting as before. I know where you live. I know where you work. I know you haven't told anyone you're thinking about me, but I know you are. Coffee Saturday? T.I. sat there for a long time after the delivery driver left. Then I called Cassian's private number. He picked up on the second ring. What happened? Not a question. He already knew something had. A delivery. At my home address. I read him the card. He knows where I live. The silence on the other end was very brief and very taut. Don't touch anything else that came in the box. I'm sending someone. It's 10 at night. Don't argue with me. His voice was different now. Not the controlled precision of the office. This was something underneath it. Something that moved like current in water. Lock your door. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He arrived in 18. He came with a man I'd seen at the office exactly once, a quiet person named Barrett, who apparently handled Cassian's security concerns, and who said approximately 4 words to me before taking the box to examine in the building's parking garage. Cassian stood in my small living room, my real living room, the one with the slightly battered couch and the overflowing bookshelf and the takeout containers I hadn't cleared, and looked at the card. His expression was doing something I hadn't seen before. The control was still there, but the seams were showing. How long has he been watching you? I asked. I don't know yet. He set the card down on my kitchen counter. But this isn't random. What does that mean? He looked at me, really looked at me, the way he sometimes did in the office when I'd said something that surprised him. It means whoever T is, they knew your home address before tonight. That's not an accident. So who is he? He was quiet for a moment. I have a theory, but I want to confirm it before I tell you. That's exactly the kind of thing you can't do right now. I crossed my arms. You can't withhold information about someone who knows where I sleep. Something in his jaw shifted. You're right, I know. He ran a hand through his hair, and I realized I'd never seen him do that before. It made him look different, less like the person who ran one of the most successful private equity firms in the Midwest, and more like a man who was genuinely, quietly scared. I have a competitor. Had, past tense. We ended our business relationship 2 years ago, badly. His name is Theodore Hargrove. He runs Hargrove Partners out of New York, and for the past year his fund has been underperforming while mine has done the opposite. I didn't think he'd. He stopped. Started again. He was at the Meridian fundraiser 6 weeks ago. He was the one who asked about you. You were watching him? I was watching everyone who watched you. The words landed in the room, and neither of us moved. How long? I asked, and I wasn't asking about Hargrove anymore. Since the charity auction in September. He looked out my window at the street below, which was exactly the kind of thing he did when he was about to say something he'd spent time not saying. You were at the silent auction table. Someone from my team had asked you to help coordinate, and you were managing 12 different things simultaneously and making it look effortless. And a man from Hargrove's fund asked your name twice in the same conversation, and I found myself cataloging exits. Cassian. I know. He turned back. I know how that sounds. It sounds like you've been surveilling me without telling me. It sounds like I noticed someone who shouldn't be noticing you. His voice went quieter, and I couldn't explain why it mattered so much, so I didn't explain it. I just made sure Barrett kept an eye on Hargrove's proximity to your schedule. I didn't say anything for a moment. My takeout was getting cold on the coffee table. The overhead light in my kitchen was one of those slightly too bright ones that makes everything look like a deposition. What does Hargrove want? I asked finally. Information. My deal pipeline acquisition targets, the modeling assumptions behind our Q3 fund positions. The kind of intelligence that takes years to develop and can be extracted from one well-placed source who has calendar access and document access and attends every sensitive meeting. Understanding settled over me slowly. He thinks I can be turned. He thinks you're undervalued. Cassian's voice was flat. He thinks you're too smart to be a supporting role and that flattery and attention, and the implication that you could be more would be enough. He's wrong. I know that. But you weren't going to tell me. He was quiet for a long moment. I was hoping I could handle it before you needed to know. I was hoping. He stopped. It doesn't matter what I was hoping. It does matter, I said. Tell me. The overhead light hummed. Somewhere outside, a cab went past. I was hoping, he said, that it would resolve cleanly, and you'd never have to know that I've been having someone followed on your behalf for 3 months, and that I'd never have to explain why. And that I could go back to pretending that what happens in my chest when you walk into my office every morning at 8:53 is just professional appreciation for a competent employee. I looked at him. He looked back. That same quality of attention he brought to everything. Complete, focused, impossible to look away from. You are, I said carefully, the most complicated person I've ever worked for. I know, and you should have told me about Hargrove immediately. Yes. And we need to figure out what to do about him. Yes. Something loosened slightly in his posture. Do you have a preference? I thought about the card. The handwriting. I know you are. I want to know exactly what he wants, I said. Not your theory, the actual intelligence. And then I want to help you end it. He looked at me for a long moment, and what I saw there was more complicated than I had words for. Relief, maybe, and fear. And something underneath both of them that I recognized because I'd been trying not to recognize it for 2 months and 11 days. All right, he said finally. But you stay here tonight. Barrett is outside, tomorrow we talk. I didn't argue. I lay awake for a long time after he left, listening to the city outside my window, thinking about exits being cataloged, and a man who'd been watching me, watched the world and hadn't said the word. The next morning, we met in his conference room. Barrett had run the analysis overnight. Theodore Hargrove, Hargrove Partners, 43 years old, Northwestern MBA, 14 years in private equity, and currently navigating a quiet disaster. 3 of his 5 flagship funds were down year over year. 2 anchor investors had quietly redirected capital. The SEC had opened a preliminary inquiry into his valuation methodology. Nothing public yet, nothing actionable, but the kind of pressure that made men who were used to winning start doing things they wouldn't otherwise do. He needs a win, Barrett said, or he needs to neutralize a competitor. Either one works, and he thinks going through me achieves that. I looked at the surveillance photos spread across the table. Hargrove at the Meridian event. Hargrove outside the building on Michigan Avenue. Hargrove at the coffee shop 2 blocks away where I went on Tuesday mornings because they had the good oat milk and didn't charge extra for it. My stomach turned. He's been systematic, Barrett said. 6 months of proximity mapping before making contact. What kind of contact does he expect next? I asked. Barrett and Cassian exchanged a look. The direct kind, Barrett said. The coffee invitation was phase 1, gauging interest. Phase 2 is a meeting where he makes his actual offer. Money, I said. Money, leverage, positioning, probably framed as an opportunity. He'd offer you a role at Hargrove Partners. Senior analyst, maybe VP. Significant compensation package. In exchange, he'd expect you to bring what you know. I thought about what I knew. Not just the documents and the meeting notes and the deal pipeline, but the texture of how Cassian worked, the reasoning patterns, the instincts that drove decisions. That wasn't transferable, but Hargrove wouldn't know that until he tried. Let me take the meeting, I said. Cassian, who had been standing at the window with his back to us, turned around. No, he said. It's the cleanest play. I meet him, I let him make his offer, I get it on record. You hand it to the SEC contact who's already looking at him, and this resolves without any of the alternatives. The alternatives being the kind that create problems you can't undo. I looked at him directly. Your grandmother didn't build this family's reputation so you could make it complicated. He went very still. I hadn't meant to say that. I'd overheard a phone call, a week into the job. Him on the phone late, his voice different from his office voice, softer and more careful, and I'd heard him say I'm trying to do it the way you would have, and I'd never mentioned it, and he didn't know I'd heard. He knew now. Barrett, he said, without looking away from me. I'll check the perimeter, Barrett said and left. The conference room was quiet. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago went about its business 31 floors below. You heard that call, Cassian said. I wasn't eavesdropping. You were in the main room, and I was at my desk, and the building was quiet, and you kept it. It wasn't mine to share. He looked at me. Something moved across his face that I'd never seen there before. Something unguarded and raw, and a little frightened. She died 4 years ago. She built the seed fund that became this firm, from a $40,000 insurance payout after my grandfather passed. She believed the financial industry could operate with integrity, and she made me prove it to her before she left any of it to me. I know, I said quietly. I read the firm history before my first interview. Then you know I have something worth protecting. I know you have something worth protecting cleanly. I leaned forward. Let me take the meeting, Cassian. I can do this. The silence stretched. His hands, flat on the conference table, tightened briefly. My conditions, he said finally. Name them, Barrett in the building. 2 additional people on the perimeter. Wire. Discreet. Barrett will fit it. And, he stopped. And you signal immediately if anything feels wrong. Not after. Not when you've decided you can handle it. Immediately. Agreed. And you tell me everything he says. Everything. No filtering. No deciding what's relevant. Agreed. He was quiet for a moment longer. Then, why are you willing to do this? The question surprised me. He wasn't the type to ask questions he didn't already have a theory about. Because he targeted me, I said. He decided I was a vulnerability. Something to exploit. I'd like to be the one who ends that. Something in Cassian's expression shifted. Not the fractional adjustment I'd learned to read, but something larger. You don't do anything to prove a point. You do things because they're correct. This is both. The corner of his mouth moved, almost nothing, almost not there. But I'd spent 2 months and 11 days learning to read a face that most people found unreadable. All right, he said. We do it your way. We spent 3 days preparing. Barrett briefed me on Hargrove's known tactics, his pressure patterns, the way he structured offers to make them feel like rescues. Cassian reviewed everything, interjecting constantly with additional scenarios. Backup contingencies. The particular way that private equity men who were failing tried to make their failures look like your opportunity. On the second night after Barrett had gone, Cassian found me in the conference room, going through Hargrove's fund filings. You don't have to memorize his entire portfolio, he said from the doorway. I'm not memorizing it, I'm looking for the narrative. I turned a page. Hargrove is going to frame this as a David and Goliath situation. Small innovative firm versus entrenched giant. He'll position what I know as a corrective, leveling a playing field that Wolf Capital tilted through superior information access. I need to know exactly where his fund's weaknesses are, so I know what story he's telling himself. Cassian came in and sat across from me. His biggest holding is a mid-market manufacturing roll-up that's about to face covenant violations on its credit facility. I know, it's here. I pushed the page toward him. He has about 8 weeks before the banks require a waiver conversation. If he doesn't close something significant before then, the anchor investors who haven't left yet will. He looked at the page, then at me. You got all that from the fund filings. The filings and the credit rating agency note from July. It's in the footnotes. I looked up. He's desperate, Cassian. Desperate men make offers that are too good. I'm going to let him make one. He was quiet for a moment. I've been in this industry for 16 years. I have people on my team who've been in it for 20. You've been here 2 months and you read footnotes in credit agency reports at 11 at night. I've always read the footnotes. I know. His voice changed. I know that about you. I know you arrive at 8:53, not 9. Because you spend the first 7 minutes before the building gets loud doing the work that's hardest to think through. I know you eat lunch at 12:15 because of the sandwich place, and you always get the same thing unless they're out of the good bread, in which case you come back upstairs. Looking quietly annoyed. I know you've worn that gray blazer 14 times this month, because the pockets are deep enough for your phone and a folded sheet of notes, which you prefer to a notebook in meetings because it looks less like you're documenting and more like you're listening. He paused. I know you're the only person in this firm who has never, not once, needed me to explain my reasoning after I've made a decision. You already knew it. And somewhere around month 1, I stopped trying to figure out if that was a coincidence and started understanding that it wasn't. I looked at him across the scattered fund filings. That's an extraordinary amount of attention to pay to an employee, I said. Yes. He held my gaze. It is. It would be professionally inadvisable to do anything about it. It would. He paused. I'm aware of that, and yet here we are. He looked down at the filings between us. After this is over, after, I agreed. His eyes came back to mine, after. We sat with that for a moment. The conference room was quiet. The city moved 31 floors below. Get some sleep, he said finally, and left. I did not get much sleep. The meeting with Hargrove was on a Thursday, at a restaurant in River North that he'd chosen, which Cassian's team had spent 48 hours in ensuring was as unfavorable for Hargrove as possible. 2 of Barrett's people already placed at adjacent tables, a frequency-encrypted recording device in the centerpiece, and Cassian himself at a corner table, in a room I couldn't see from my position, which I was informed of, and immediately tried not to think about. Theodore Hargrove was polished, in the way that men who'd spent decades performing competence became polished, smooth, easy, comfortable in his own skin, in a way that was designed to make you comfortable in his skin too. He stood when I arrived, shook my hand warmly, told me I looked wonderful, and gestured to the wine menu like we were old friends celebrating something. I'm glad you came, he said, settling back into his chair with the air of someone who'd already decided how this would go. I was beginning to think you might not. I was curious, I said. Which was true. Your note wasn't exactly conventional, no, he smiled. But you aren't exactly conventional. That's rather the point. He spent the first 20 minutes doing what Barrett had predicted. Establishing rapport, probing without appearing to probe, framing Wolf Capital as a firm that didn't appreciate what it had. It was skillful. If I hadn't been briefed, if I hadn't spent 3 days reading his fund filings, If I'd been the person he thought I was, someone smart but overlooked, talented but frustrated, it might have worked. "Tell me," he said, after we'd ordered, and the small talk had served its purpose, "how long do you plan to stay in a supporting role?" I'm not sure I'd characterize my position that way. Cassian Wolf is the name on the door. He kept his voice friendly, reasonable. "You're the infrastructure. The brilliant infrastructure. Don't misunderstand. I've watched you work. You're remarkable. But remarkable infrastructure is still infrastructure. And you're offering something different. I'm offering a position where your name is on the analysis, where your models are cited, where your judgment shapes the fund's direction rather than supporting someone else's." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm offering VP of Research at Hargrove Partners. Compensation at the top of the market range, carry in the fund, your own direct reports." I let that land. Let him watch me think about it. "That's generous," I said. "You'd be worth every dollar. The research that's been coming out of Wolf Capital in the past 2 months." He paused, precise and careful, the Fed minutes analysis on the Hendricks deal. "The currency conversion flag that went to legal last month. That thinking is distinctive. I'd like to have that thinking working for me." There it was. He knew about specific internal work product, work that had never left the building. "You've been doing your research," I said. "I'm thorough." He smiled again. "It's what I'm good at." "It is." I folded my hands on the table. "It's also what you're not supposed to be doing with information that originates from a competitor's internal analysis." The smile stayed on his face for a moment, pure inertia. Before it understood, it had nowhere to go. "I think," I said, keeping my voice pleasant, "that this is probably a good place to stop." He recovered quickly. "They always did. I don't know what you think. You heard. I think I heard you reference specific internal work product from Wolf Capital that has never been published or disclosed externally. I think that means you have a source inside the firm, or you've been accessing information you shouldn't have. Either way, it's going to be very interesting to the SEC inquiry that's already open on your valuation methodology." I picked up my water glass. "I've been recording this conversation. Barrett, that's the gentleman 2 tables to your left, has the original file. Copies have already been forwarded to 2 separate attorneys and a federal prosecutor who has been looking at your fund for 6 months." Hargrove's face had gone the particular shade of pale that only comes from realizing an exit you assumed existed has been bricked over. The gentleman 2 tables to the left stood up. I pushed back my chair. "You mistook me for a vulnerability," I said. "I'd like to be the last person who makes that mistake." I walked out into the November afternoon, and my hands were entirely steady, and I stood on the sidewalk for approximately 4 seconds before Cassian came out of the side door and pulled me into his arms without a word. It wasn't graceful. He was wearing his coat over his suit, and I was in heels that were slightly too high for standing still, and his chin hit the top of my head at a slightly wrong angle, and neither of us said anything for a long moment. "It's done," I said into his shoulder. "I know." His arms tightened. "I watched the whole thing. You were supposed to be in the back room." I moved. Barrett is going to be insufferable about his sightlines. His chest moved against me with something that might have been a laugh. Let him be. He pulled back enough to look at me. Not far, just enough. His gray eyes were doing the thing they did sometimes when he'd decided to let me see past the surface. "Are you all right?" "Yes. I was, actually. I'm good. I searched for the right word and found it. Resolved." Something in his expression did what I'd only ever seen it do in fragments. Opened fully, into something that wasn't controlled at all. "Good," he said, "because I have things to say to you that I've been not saying for 2 months, and I'd rather you be resolved first." "I'm resolved. I love you." He said it the way he made decisions, not impulsively, not dramatically, just as a thing that had been true for long enough that saying it was only a formality. "I've been in love with you since the morning." You corrected a modeling assumption I'd been using for 3 years, and explained your reasoning in 4 sentences that I couldn't argue with. I've been managing it poorly. You've been managing it by having Barrett follow everyone who looked at me. Yes, well, the corner of his mouth moved. I'm working on proportionality. You're going to have to do better than that, I know. He reached up and brushed a strand of hair back from my face, a small deliberate gesture that was entirely inconsistent with the way Cassian Wolf moved through the world. I have a proposal. Another one involving wire equipment? No. He was almost smiling now. Almost. A weekend, just us. I have a place on Lake Michigan, quiet, no one in a 50-mile radius who works in finance. We figure out what this is. I already know what this is, so do I. His thumb grazed my cheekbone. But I'd like some time to say it out loud without an audience. Barrett appeared in my peripheral vision, heading toward the car with his phone to his ear, conspicuously not looking at us. The weekend, I said. The weekend, he confirmed. We went back inside to wrap up with the attorneys. I sat across the table from Cassian for 2 hours of depositions and follow-up documentation, and every time our eyes met across the legal pads and coffee cups, I felt the same thing. The particular steadiness of knowing that the ground beneath you is exactly what you thought it was. Theodore Hargrove resigned from Hargrove Partners 11 days later, citing personal reasons. The SEC inquiry became a formal investigation 6 weeks after that. Cassian gave me exactly 1 long weekend on Lake Michigan, as promised. Gray November water and a cabin that cost more than my entire apartment building, but had the best kitchen I'd ever cooked in, and 2 uninterrupted days of being honest about things we'd been carefully not saying. I did not become Cassian's assistant after that. I became his director of research, with my name on the analysis and my own team, and a compensation structure that I negotiated myself, which he agreed to without argument, which was either a sign of respect or a sign that he'd known exactly what it would take and had planned accordingly. Probably both. Barrett, for the record, was insufferable about the sightlines. I let him be. On my first anniversary at Wolf Capital, the real one, 2 months and 11 days plus 365, I arrived at 8:53, the way I always did, the way I'd done for 14 months. I set down my coffee and opened my laptop and found, sitting beside my keyboard, a small folded card in handwriting I knew better than my own. For the woman who reads the footnotes, I've been noticing you for a year. I plan to keep noticing you for considerably longer. No initial this time. Just his name, written out in full, like a thing he was entirely certain of. I put the card in my pocket and went to do the work that was hardest to think through. And when he walked past my desk at 8:59, he didn't say anything, just let his hand rest briefly on my shoulder as he went. A small, precise, deliberate thing, the kind of contact that's not for anyone watching, just for the 2 people who understand what it means. I understood what it meant. I'd been understanding it for a year. I just got to say so now.